Hello fellow crafters, I'm Karen and this is the third video in the Peppermint Christmas crafting series. In this video I'll be showing you how to make this wall hanging of peppermints and greens hanging from a branch. The supplies that you'll need are there on the screen, but I wanted to comment about two of them that I have. So the stick that I found was just in my in-laws' backyard. This one happens to be very lightweight because it's actually sort of rotten. You'll just want to make sure that if you are picking a stick from the yard somewhere, that you get it cleaned up well and that it doesn't have any bugs or wetness in it. You don't want any mold or mildew growing on the stick when you have it in your house. And all I did to take care of this one was to, actually I washed this. Which was mostly because the day that I found this I got poison ivy, and poison ivy, if you know me, is very bad for me. So I washed the life out of this one to make sure that I wouldn't get any from it. And then I cut it to the length that I wanted, and then I sanded the ends a little bit just to round them off. So select your stick, and then if you can't find a stick, you could always use a dowel, which you can buy at a hardware store or craft store. I find that the stick looks more interesting, looks more natural, but dowel is always an option. And then you'll need something to hang the peppermints from and to hang the stick. And for that I've selected ribbon. You could use string or embroidery floss or something else, but I thought that the ribbon would look the best, so that's what I went with. This is just a 1/4 inch white ribbon. Okay. And then I'll say this too, that I'm not sure exactly, starting this, what greens I'm going to use. The pine branches, which I just found at a craft store last year, I think, they are probably going to win out because they look very Christmassy. But I also have this sort of fern green and these sort of fuzzy fern greens. I'm not sure what the actual plants are, but they are just ones that I found in craft stores along the way and that I had in my personal stock that I'm going to try out with this. It'll depend what looks the best, basically. So first I need to catch you up on what I've done so far with this. I am starting sort of mid-project, and you can see that I have my circles already cut out and drilled. So I just want to explain what I've done there before we go into the rest of it. This project originally was inspired by a display that I saw at Longwood Gardens, and it was the same concept where there was a branch and it had various presents wrapped and hanging from it instead of the peppermints, and they were just different sizes and different shape of rectangle, and there were some greens mingled in, and it just looked really pretty, and it was a different way of looking at presents, and I liked that. So I wanted to apply that same concept here. So the first thing that I did once I had decided to do this was drew many attempts at the design. It's in crafts, you'll find things are often best when they look random, and it's very hard for me, at least, to make things look random on purpose. So I drew several iterations of this, and I have just 6 on here, and I was just trying to figure out, I wanted to have an odd number of strings because that would look the best. So I toyed with 5 and with 7, decided to go with 7 in the end. And then I wanted a mixture of large, sort of large, medium, and small peppermints to provide variation. I did experiment a little with other shapes, sort of like a rounded diamond and oval, and I think that you could do that if you wanted to have just a variation on this, or if you were doing something more Dr. Seuss-y, you could easily do very whimsical shapes and just paint them in the peppermint pattern. But I ended up deciding to just go with circles for this myself, and then it was just a matter of where do I want groups of 3, groups of 2, individual ones, and after sketching for a while I kind of figured out the primary, I'll lay it out here for you. the primary orientation of the large ones was what sort of drove me. So I've got, this one is 2-inch diameter, 3-inch diameter, another 2-inch diameter, and a 2 1/4 over here. So I liked that layout. And then I filled in around it. So I have a bunch of 1 inches. 1 inch there, 1 inch here, and I haven't decided which way the branch is going to go, but it would be up there. So I'll turn it when I finish laying these out. This one's 1.5 inches, and 1 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inches. Move that a little. That was my 2, 2 1/4, 1. I think I have this sort of like that. 1.5 and 1. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for in pattern. And it just looked pleasantly random. So based on that drawing, I actually figured out the measurements after I had drawn sort of the visual sketch of it, and just approximated the proportions. I knew I wanted this one to be the biggest, and then this one, and then these. So I just guessed at some measurements and scaled it according to sort of how big I thought it could reasonably be to go in my house. If you had a really big wall area to cover and you could get a really long stick, you could of course just scale these up and even follow the same pattern, but with, instead of 3 inches, you could do 6 inches or something like that. But for my sake, it needed to be fairly small, within the 2 foot total width. So then I had, this wood is 1/4 inch plywood that I bought at the hardware store. And I used a compass to mark the circles on the board, leaving enough room to cut in between with the bandsaw. And then I used my dad's bandsaw to cut out the circles. And they were somewhat rough edges, especially on the tiny ones, because it was very hard to hold them. Credit to my husband for actually doing the tiny ones for me. And then I brought them home and drilled the holes. And these are, in my case, I'm using 1/8 inch holes, which had more to do with the size of the ribbon that I had imagined than anything else. I wanted to be able to get a ribbon through it, but not have it be especially large. Especially since when I've got a 1 inch one that has 2 1/8 inch holes, that's actually, you're losing 1/4 of your space there in the line. So, I then went ahead and hand sanded a little bit. I used, I gotta check what grit sandpaper I used. I used 80 grit sandpaper in this case to round out the rough edges. And they're not perfect circles, but they don't have to be. And then I used a 220 grit to just smooth the worst of the drilling bits and the outer edges. And I will say one other thing, which is that these holes are marked 1/8 inch in from the edge. You want to make sure that they come in far enough from the edge that you don't, you don't want to be close enough to the edge that it breaks the wood. So you need to leave enough of a margin there to have solid wood on the outside of the holes. And then I just dusted off the sawdust. So that's as much as I've done so far. And the next step, this is actually a fairly simple one, but a simple project overall. I'm going to paint the backs, or well, the surfaces of these, front, sides, and back, white. and I just have regular white paint from the craft store, and then I'll be able to, it'll probably take 2 coats of white paint to cover well. The surfaces of this this board are pretty pleasantly smooth, and there's not a lot of variation in color, so it shouldn't take too many coats. And then I'll paint I'll sketch the peppermint pattern on, paint the red, give it a coat of varnish, and then it'll just be a matter of cutting the ribbon and tying it to the branch. After that, we'll add the greens in whatever quantity it looks right to fill out the overall view. So put this aside for now, and I'm just going to grab my paper plate, which is what I'm using as a palette, get some paint, and there's no fancy method here. I'm just going to be using a foam brush to paint the white on. You want to make sure you don't fill in the holes, at least not completely. You can always run like a pin inside afterward if you do get some paint in there. It's not the end of the world. But if you can avoid filling them up with lots of paint, do. It'll save you effort later. And you'll just want to have a good place to dry them. You can always put down paper. I don't use newspaper myself just because I'm always afraid that it'll pick up some of the ink. So I will often use just a regular piece of paper or a piece of cardboard. So I'll get set up for that, and we'll do some painting. I have opted to use some parchment paper as my drying paper. Alright, so those have 1 coat of paint, and it's still a little bit damp on this surface, so I'm not ready to go on to the bottom for the second coat, which is the face that I've already painted, and it's facing down. So I'm going to let these sit for a few minutes and dry a little bit more and get the paint off my fingers, and then I'll keep going with the second coat. Ready for coat 2. That needs a little bit more drying time before I can even touch it to do the edges. So I'm going to tell you about the tool I was making during the first drying session. So I was trying to think through how to mark the peppermint pattern on there. And if you watched my my other video where I worked through the large trio of peppermints that are a standing sort of mantle decoration, for those there are 5 stripes of red, and I marked them just by holding a flexible tape measure around the outside of the circle, the wooden circle, and marking fifths, so marking a fifth of the total circumference. There are a lot more of these, and that seems like a lot of work. And I also am thinking that for this, it makes more sense to do thirds than it does to do fifths. And I think I might do a little different of a pattern too, where it's wide stripes at thirds and then a thin stripe in between each one. Haven't decided that for sure yet, but there seemed like there had to be a faster way to make third divisions in this, rather than measuring around the circumference or trying to use a protractor to get the angles. So I went up to my computer and I made a bullseye, basically, which is just 2 roughly concentric circles, and they've got 3 lines that intersect at the center, where those lines are thirds, so 120 degrees apart each. And I have a big one and a little one. My thinking being that I can just place this on my circle. I can punch out a hole in the middle, and then for each one, I can just put a ruler along this line and go out to the edge of the circle. So if I were to place this on my large circle, I'm probably going to eyeball center, and I can mark the center point, mark all of the outer edges, and then just move along. So it's sort of a little, like a template or tracing tool. And then to make the size, I did 1 3/4 for the outer circle in diameter, so that I can mark the 2-inch and the 2 1/4-inch circles fairly easily. And then I did a separate one that's just 3/4 of an inch. Although it's occurring to me now that there's a simpler way to do this, which would be to make one really big circle, just place this down on top of it, and center your circle here. That might be better. I mean, I could still do that. It's probably not worth doing differently for this round, because I already made this and cut it out, but I guess you don't get your center that way if it's not on top. Of course, you could then place it on top and mark the center. Anyways, many ways to do it. There's no, like, brilliant solution here. It just needs to be a solution that works. So I've punched a hole in the center, and that'll be my little tracing tool so that I can mark the thirds around the circle. Let's see if we're ready for another coat here. Yeah, that's dry enough to touch. So I'm going around the edges now. And you'll want to make sure that you sort of remember where you started, unless you're sure you can tell the difference between one coat and 2, because you don't want to not know where you are if you've done the whole edge. Okay, that's 2 coats of paint on all of them. It looks thick enough to me. I'm going to go back through and mark them after the paint has had a chance to dry and I've had a chance to wash my brush. The red paint that I'll be using is just regular craft paint. This one happens to be called Red Apple. But I have to mark using my handy dandy little tool first, and then I can paint after that. Okay, so this looks dry enough and feels dry enough that I can mark my thirds on the pieces. So I'm just going to pick whichever side looks nicer. Kind of 6 one, half dozen the other, but you'll probably like one side better than the other. So for this one, I'm just kind of eyeballing. You could always measure if you use this same method. You could measure from the edges to make sure that it's all the same. Find center. I'm just going to eyeball, mark my center point. And then, if you want to be really precise, you could use a ruler. And there you have it. So that's thirds marked on that one. I'm going to go ahead and do the same process either from the top or from underneath with the smaller ones for the rest of these. I'll say this too, that I want to kind of randomize where the thirds point. So on the one hand, it's kind of just pick it up and go wherever it is. But I may do some intentional randomizing to figure out the orientation of the red stripes on all of my peppermints. For these smaller ones, I'm going to mark the sides first, and then go back and mark the centers. To be able to mark those centers, I'm going to actually just cut my template down to the smaller size. And now I can line up my 3 points approximately. Or just try to center this on it. Mark my center. Lather, rinse, repeat. Okay, so I've got all my points marked. The next step is actually to use my pencil again and to sketch the shape. Now, if you've watched the trio video, you've seen that for those I did a curved peppermint stripe. I like the way those look. I think it looks a little fancier. It's pretty easy to draw, and it's very doable when you're painting, so I'll just start on the biggest one, I guess. And basically, it's kind of an apostrophe shape. You start at your outside point, and you make an apostrophe that comes down to meet the center. So, kind of that shape. It doesn't have to be perfect. But you do want to kind of stick with whatever you've done, because it's really hard to erase off of the paint. So once you've done it, you're kind of committed, unless that stripe is going to be under the red paint, which this one is, so I'm going to correct it a little to be just slightly more gradual. Well, let me go ahead and do that on all of them, and then I'll come and add the other side of the stripe. There. And I will say that the main concept, if you're struggling to do this, practice on paper first. But the main idea is once you get started, to keep your eyes on the center point. That's where you're heading, because if you're not looking where you're heading, you're only looking where you are, then you'll probably miss the center point. And it does look better if they all meet pretty precisely in the center. So the next thing that I did, or that I've done with these to get peppermint shape, is to measure a distance consistently that looks about right. So I kind of, alright, let me back up. I kind of figure out where the stripe ought to be. About there. And then I'm taking a chord, which is this point, or a line that crosses between the two edges of the circle. So this one happens to be 1.5 inches. Then I just move that mark over here, move that mark over here. And then what you can do is just, it's basically the same shape, but I usually go less of a severe curve at the beginning and kind of try to make it fatter a little lower down. So it's a little bit more of a consistent curve as opposed to a a harsh curve at the top. And then I did learn that you should make some sort of marking very faintly as to which one is your red and leave the white alone, so that when you do come back to paint, there's no confusion. I did little X's on my other one, but I found that it showed through more than I was expecting. So I'm just doing little dashes here, and I'm trying to mark them really lightly. So that'll finish out the peppermint shape. And I'm going to probably paint that part on before deciding if I want to do a narrow stripe in between. I think I probably will, but I may mix and match. And I'm going to measure for these larger ones to get a consistent shape with this cord, but for the smaller ones, it's not worth it. I'm just going to eyeball. So for my 2 1/4 inch diameter peppermint, I'm doing a 1 inch cord. Probably also do a 1 inch cord for the 2 inch diameters. And it'll be good to have a little bit of variation in the stripe thickness between peppermints and such. If it looks too consistent, like if you measured really precisely and paint really precisely, in the end you may find that it looks less good because it's so precise. Think about things in nature where a group of trees is beautiful because it has various types of trees and at various points of growth, various sizes, shapes. If they all look the same, you've got kind of an orderliness that might be impressive and beautiful in its own way, but it's just different. And I'll measure for these. I'm going to do, I think, a 1/2 inch, maybe. Let's see what that is. 5/8. It actually might be. It's probably more like 3/4. 3/4 it is. And these ones that I'm eyeballing, just as a general rule, I'm aiming for just slightly less than half of the distance so that my white stripe will end up being a little bit wider than my red stripe, which also leaves room well for if I put in a narrow stripe in between. Excellent. Now I get to paint the red in. Using just a nice narrow brush designed for acrylics. It's nothing fancy or expensive, just what I bought at the craft store. And I think I'm going to start with the tiny ones because I'll definitely use this brush more for those. I may need to grab a larger brush too to fill in some of the gaps because I don't want to do it all with this one. There's what one looks like. I'm not worried about going over the edges because I am going to paint down the edges with the red as well. So as long as I stay within the confines of where that stripe would be in the physical candy, I'll be fine. And I am expecting to do a second coat on the red, so I'm going fairly thin with my paint. It just looks better with 2 coats. Alright, there's what it looks like with one coat. Time to start on the second coat. I realized, though, I haven't done the edges. So, edges first, and then a second coat. That one might get a bonus third coat. You could mark these with a pencil. It's just a straight line down from whatever point meets the edge. But I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to paint it, because I was going to eyeball the pencil line anyways, so might as well just eyeball with a paintbrush. So it's the same thing through here. Just a single coat, and then that'll get a second coat as well. So now I have to make the choice between adding that extra stripe, the narrow stripe in between, versus just leaving them as is. They look good as is, and the risk, of course, is that if I change them, I won't like them as much. I'm going to take a look at my planned orientation here, because I might do it just on the larger ones. I think that is what I'll do. I'll do it on everything except the 1 inches. And I'm going to wash this brush because it's got some paint buildup in it, and switch to another brush for that. Then I'll touch up these two over here, which have little red spots where they don't belong. I'll pencil on these red stripes to the big ones. So for drawing, I'm going to move these. So those are actually done. Woo! Drawing these last stripes, all I'm going to do is try to really go halfway between the existing red stripes. And you kind of want to stay like halfway the whole way, so it's centered between the widest point, it's centered at every point, and then it's centered when it hits the center. Those will also go down the edge. I don't necessarily feel a need to mark that, though. I also have always found it easier to start at the edge and work my way to the center. I think it's because there's an obvious end point to keep your eye on. From painting the large trio set, I did learn that these stripes don't really need 2 coats. So I'm trying to make my pencil markings light enough that it won't show through as much. And this design is just another one that I found as I was looking at pictures of peppermints. They often have wide stripes and narrow stripes. So I just decided which ones I liked the most, and it was this one and the pattern that I used on the trio. Alright, I'm ready to paint these. So, a fun fact, almost every single one of these little stripes is off-center on the side in about that relationship, which is maybe a 3 to 5. So maybe I need some eyeball calibration, but I think it looks pretty, so I don't care. The other thing that now I'm looking at my little ones, and they look like they want that narrow little stripe. I don't know if I'll be disappointed if I don't do it. I wanted to see them kind of mixed in to see if that helps. Ooh, that does help. Okay, I'm good with it. They look good mixed in. So I just need to grab a brush here to touch up the white paint on those two. Okay, I'm going to let the paint dry and cure a little bit, just for maybe a half hour or so, and then I'll come back, throw a coat of varnish on it real quick, and then I can attach it to the branch. So here we have sort of the peppermints so far. The end is in sight, which is good because I am rather sick of painting at this point. Okay, so I am back and I am ready to varnish these. The paint is very dry, so I'm just going to do one coat of varnish on these. It's not really necessary to do 2 coats. You certainly could, but I'm just putting it on to put a slight protective layer for the paint, just something to keep it a little bit safe and to make it a little bit easier to dust off if I were to ever need to clean it. So I'll do that, and then after that, it'll just be a matter of attaching them to the branch. And this varnish that I'm using is, it's from Deco Art. It's just a matte varnish. It goes on pretty cleanly, and it dries very quickly, so I'll do the top and then go around and do the sides and do the bottom again like the rest of the process has been. And same as with the paint, you want to kind of reduce how much of it goes down in the hole because it will block it a little. It's going to be tricky with this, but because it's very, very liquidy. That varnish picked up a decent amount of red paint, which I could see when I placed it down on the white part of this. Fortunately, I was able to kind of pick it up off of there with the brush. But it is something you want to keep an eye out for. I may need to wash this brush just to make sure, because I don't want to turn all the white parts orange, which is what it looks like. So I'm going to go wash this quick. Ta-da! So that is varnish on all of those, front, back, and sides. I will say that normally I would start with the back and end on the front so that the front dries upward. You can see right now I have the fronts down, but I don't think it'll be an issue because this stuff dries super duper fast. There was something else I was going to say, but I don't remember. So I'm going to wash this brush, let these dry for a second, and then start cutting ribbon for the branch. I remember the thing. The thing was that when you're painting around the sides, you might get some varnish that comes up over the front and back edges. You just want to be careful that you kind of level that a little bit. That way you won't have a little bump around the edge. That was that. So this kind of wants to hang this way. It'll just be a question of whether I do it this way or this way. This has that kind of ugly piece, so I think it makes the most sense to do it this way, which you're looking at it not the way I am, probably, unless I do this camera angle. So that's what I'm going to do. And I don't want to fight the stick, so I do want to hang it in such a way that it is balanced and I'm not trying to hang it sideways or something. It's not going to be worthwhile to try and fight the stick. So I gotta find the end of this. There's a little sticker. And I'm going to use the same ribbon to go down through those as I am to go up and around the edge of this. This is a type of ribbon that could fray, so you may want to use a dab of glue or nail polish just at the end of it so that it doesn't fray. I'm not going to do the work of going through any sort of hemming or anything for this. I had a lot of slack there unnecessarily. And I'm not trying to make this look especially pretty, just very functional. So I'm going to do a triple knot here for good measure. Cut the end of that off. And I think that about that much looks pretty nice. So give myself a little more slack to go around and to tie. And I'm just putting this maybe 4 inches from the end of the stick. It really doesn't matter where you place it. I'm anticipating that my outermost hangings will be on the outside of this stick. I can always slide it a little though, so got options. Snip, snip there. And I'm giving just a little bit of slack. I don't want to cut it too close because there's a risk the knot would come untied and that would be very disappointing. So I now have a hanging stick. Ta-da! And I need to twist these a little so that it hangs the way I had intended. That way up. There we go. Even better hanging stick. So as far as attaching these go, this is where you're going to need to come back to your pattern. Because once you find an orientation that you like of your little peppermints, you want to stick with it and not have to think through it or be disappointed that you forgot it and have to redo. And I will comment that with the drilling of the holes, some of these have 2 holes and some of them have 1. This was just me taking a stab at sort of hoping that it looks good with the ribbon going through around the back and then back through the bottom if it's a peppermint that has another peppermint below it. And if it's the bottommost one, I'm going to go through from the front to the back and tie a knot at the back, and it'll just end there. So we'll see how that goes. I think I'm going to start with the centermost one, which I'm choosing not because it's the center, although that would be something I would often do. I'm doing that because it's the only one I have that has 3 peppermints in it. So I'm going where I have the most peppermints, in other words. And I'm doing that so that I can sort of set the ribbon length for the one that needs to have the most peppermints in it. And then everything else can be scaled around it. And I'm going to, I think, keep doing triple knots just because it makes me feel a little bit better about this staying knotted forever. So I'm going to tie to the branch. Oh, whoops. I was going to say I'm going to tie to the branch and then add the peppermints before I cut it, but I did not think that all the way through because I can't add peppermints when it's on this. That aside, new plan, cut the ribbon, hope for the best. So I need to eyeball a bit. I need a 1.5 inch. Let's see if they're dry. You feel pretty dry. Slight stickiness there. I'm going to sort these just so I do not mess this up. I'm actually going to lay them out up here, I think. Beautiful. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. This is the row I'm starting with. So that spacing actually seems pretty nice. So I'm going to leave a little bit of ribbon at the top. And I always seem to fail to think through how much will need to be there in excess so that it can go through and back and everything else. So if I want it about here and here and here, because we want to have enough vertical space that it looks visually pleasing. If it's too far spaced out, it's going to look messy, and if it's too close together, it's going to look messy. So it needs to be somewhere in that balanced middle range. I've got 10 yards of this, and I'm going to not worry about having excess on here. I may even put these in, but not make it permanent. That's a solid plan. until I've laid them all out on ribbon, and then I can just tie off each. It's going to be easier to tie off because we need to make sure that the upper ones stay where they belong, which means that if I'm coming, alright, let's just start. Also, this is going to be a challenge, and I should have probably left a little bit more to aid in the process of getting these through. And I did practice this. Practice is a strong word, but I did test this, I guess, is more accurate. This is a seam ripper. It just has a pointy end, which is why I'm going to use it right now. Just to get some of the inside of that cleared out, because I had a little paint in this one. Sewing people would probably cringe at knowing this was a use of a seam ripper, but oh well. Actually, I might be able to use this for the whole process. This is not a thread, therefore we can't thread it through a needle, but the idea is basically the same. So I'm rolling this up as tightly as I can. There's no correct top-bottom orientation to this, so I'm going in and coming out the back. You just want to track with your ribbon sort of all the way through, watching it from the top so you don't get a whole bunch of twists in it, or you don't want them. So that's about right. And I'm debating, I don't want them to fall, so I could tie a knot here. I think that makes the most sense, to tie a knot here, then bring it back through the front, and go to the next one. Yeah. How wrong could it go? So I'm going to scooch that up a bit so I can get my knot in. And it looks like a single knot in this is enough to hold it. I mean, it'll be held in place somewhat just by being on the ribbon. So I need to come back through and I am trying to fold this in thirds, which is kind of miserable because that makes it about the right size to go through this hole, or it did the first time. Boy. Alright, well, it's poking in there, and this is, in fact, not long enough, which is why I have a pin. So I'm trying to push that through a little to get it started, and pull through from the other side. Yeah, there we go. Nice. And you want to work out any twists that you don't want. I want it to run sort of flat along the back like that. And yeah, that's what I intended. So then I need the same process here. It might be a little smaller because it's, or a little harder because it's smaller. If anyone has any real clever ideas about how to do this more successfully, you can put it in the comments for next time I need this skill. But that's going alright. It can kind of be just shoved through with the pin. I've also thought about putting a piece of tape around it to make sort of a needle, like a built-in needle. But I won't do it if I don't have to. Oh, drat. I went the wrong way. That's disappointing. Okay, new plan. Go the right way. Which is from the front to the back because I want it to end. I want the like distance from top to bottom of the peppermint to be accomplished on the back. Otherwise it blocks the view of the peppermint from the front, which defeats the whole purpose. So, there we go. I'm getting better at this. Okay. That's acceptable. And I need a knot. Hopefully this isn't too short because that would be really sad. I'd have to redo. But I think it'll be alright. And then get that nice and tight. Good. And back through the other way. It really does help to push it through with the pin, which I wouldn't have guessed. But I sort of push the pin through sideways in a sense, like try to catch it sideways and then push it. Because it's a pin, obviously, so it would go right through the ribbon. Okay. That's acceptable. Hope this looks good at the end. It's always a little bit of a guess when you do these kinds of projects. You start it, you plan it, seems like a good plan at the time, and then you sort of hope you can execute well. And then you realize things you didn't plan. There we go. Very good. So those are about evenly spaced, which is what I was aiming for with this set. And that means I can tie off this final knot. And I'm going to probably double knot this at least, just to be sure it doesn't start coming apart on me. The nice bit about this is if someday you didn't like the ribbon or wanted to make it red instead of white or green or whatever, you could always just pull the ribbon and repeat the process with different ribbon. And cut the little end there. And there you have it. Perfect. And by perfect, I mean pretty much what I was hoping for. So I'm going to go ahead and work sideways from the center. And starting with this one because there's only one of them and it'll be satisfying to do a whole row with only one. And I'll check in when I'm done. All right. So we have a finished product here. It's probably going to spin some, yep, since I don't have it up against a wall. And if you were intending to do this as like a free hanging, like a mobile or something like that, you'd want to paint both sides. But I think it is pretty much exactly what I had imagined. And I'm quite happy with it. So, there you have it. I've just realized that I've forgotten to do the greens. So, not the final product. You could stop here, and I think it would look fine. I'm sort of tempted to stop here. But I have to at least consider the greens option. So since I have these ferny things, and there's another loose one here somewhere. There it is. And these little ferny things free, I'm going to consider these as first. And I'm just going to kind of lay it out and see what I think. I think it's a little too much. It distracts from the peppermints. Overruled. Second option. Those have merit. I have more of them too. Here's one. It does add a nice little something. These, I think, are just too much. So there's a decision made. We'll hang some of these. Now, I need to grab more of them maybe. Placement is going to be critical here because you don't want to distract from what you've already got going here. But I think on the outsides is nice. I have 6 of them right now. Usually, odd numbers win. It doesn't look full enough. Kind of like it up here. What if I did 2 there? That's not bad. So I need 1 more. Just a little bent. So I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ribbons. I think I'm going to approach it the same way I did with the peppermints, which is to tie it to the branch first. It's the right idea, at least. This one, I think I'm going to do the same way. I was thinking about just tying it straight onto the branch in the first knot, but I'm leaning away from that. I'm going to give myself a good amount of slack on this one just because it's going to be a real pain to do. And I'm just going to come, I've got the stems crossed, and I want to tie this across that crossed stem bit. And hopefully it doesn't make them shoot straight out to the side. Yeah, made him shoot straight across like I was hoping not. So I may have to knot the other one across. So I'm going the opposite way of the way I just knotted. I'm hoping that will kind of cancel out the direction I just created. I think it did, which is superb. And I've just forgotten how to make a knot. Alright, that'll do. Let's straighten that out a bit, take a look at it. So there's the laying down version of what it looks like. And I'm actually going to use my Lazy Susan to tip it up here. So you get a little different view. So that is the final product. Actual final product this time. And here it is up on the wall. Thanks for supporting Tickled Fancy Crafting by watching this video. Click the like button to let me know that you enjoyed the content and subscribe to see new Tickled Fancy Crafting videos in your feed. If you'd like to be informed directly about the content, ring the notifications bell. Comment with crafts that you would like to see in the future, and remember, you can make this.